I'm Amy Goodman. As we continue covering Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen, we turn to Andrew Cockburn, Washington editor for Harper's Magazine. His latest piece for Harper's is headlined "Acceptable Losses, Aiding and Abetting the Saudi Slaughter in Yemen." Andrew Cockburn's piece begins just a few short years ago. Yemen was judged to be among the poorest countries in the world, ranking 154th out of the 187 nations on the UN's Human Development Index. 1 in every 5 Yemenis went hungry. Almost 1 in 3 was unemployed. Every year, 40,000 children died before their 5th birthday, and experts predicted the country would soon run out of water. Such was the dire condition of the country before Saudi Arabia unleashed a bombing campaign in March 2015, which has destroyed warehouses, factories, power plants, ports, hospitals, water tanks, gas stations, and bridges, along with miscellaneous targets ranging from donkey carts to wedding parties to archaeological monuments. Thousands of civilians, no one knows how many, have been killed or wounded. Along with the bombing, the Saudis have enforced a blockade, cutting off supplies of food, fuel, and medicine. A year and a half into the war, the health system has largely broken down, and much of the country is on the brink of starvation. Those the words of Andrew Cockburn, the Washington editor for Harper's Magazine. He joins us now from Washington. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Andrew Cockburn. Talk about the U.S. support for Saudi Arabia and what Saudi Arabia is doing in Yemen.
Well, the U.S. support has been basically unconditional. I mean, there have been some sort of behind-the-scenes grumbles and efforts to sort of suggest that they might tone it down a bit. But basically, from the very beginning, the support, as your previous guest was saying, has not only been consisted of supplying arms continually through the war, and certainly before the war, but also fully fledged diplomatic support. I mean, at the beginning of the war, the Saudis effectively sponsored a UN resolution which basically called for the other side, the Houthis, who controlled the capital and large parts of the country, to unconditionally surrender and go back home to the area they came from. The US supported that, which was obviously going to, was no way to a peaceful solution, was going to continue the war. Later, in about last fall, the Dutch government introduced a resolution saying that that there should be an independent investigation of war crimes by both sides, by all sides in Yemen. The U.S. again effectively took the lead in killing that initiative to make sure that didn't happen. In fact, in the course of researching this article, I talked to a very senior State Department official, and I said, well, did you do that? Why did you do that? And he said, well, we agreed with President Hadi. President Hadi, of course, is the Saudi pawn, the so-called president who's been living in Riyadh for most of the war. It's a very shocking story of just how casually the U.S. has enabled, not just by supplying the weapons, but by giving diplomatic backup to this ongoing sort of casual war crime.
What is Saudi Arabia and the U.S. hoping to accomplish in Yemen?
Well, that's a great question. The U.S., it's not clear at all. The Saudis basically, I mean, in the article I go at some length into the sort of background to all this, but basically they got freaked out at the thought that Iran was establishing a beachhead on their southern border, which was really kind of hysterical paranoia, because Iran wasn't really doing that. I mean, they were making some kind of connection with the Houthis, who are a religious minority, tribal minority living in northern Yemen. But there was very little prospect of Iran setting up bases and so on and so forth. And the U.S. just kind of, and so the Saudis got more and more sort of outraged as the Houthis took power in Yemen, or seemed to be taking over the country. And the U.S. kind of went along with it. I mean, I was told very early on in the war, Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken went to Riyadh to ask this. This is 2 weeks. It was 2 weeks into the war, when they'd already been bombing away, using the U.S. bombs, U.S.-supplied bombs, using U.S. weapons, killing already dozens, if not certainly, hundreds of civilians. destroying factories. And finally, Blinken turns up in Riyadh and asks, by the way, what are you trying to accomplish here? And the Saudis effectively said, or at least the Americans understood them to say, well, we basically want to wipe out the Houthis. Well, they termed it as end all Iranian influence in Yemen. So the Americans, Blinken was a bit shocked by that, so I'm told, and said, well, you know, that's going a bit far. But you should certainly stop the Houthis taking over the country. And that effectively gave the Saudis carte blanche to continue this kind of mindless carpet bombing, in effect, that's been going on almost ever since. There's been a bit of a lull over the summer when you had the peace talks going on, but otherwise it's this. And as you mentioned at the beginning, reading the beginning of my article, this was a desperately poor country, you know, with terrible conditions. Everyone was, human rights people, you know, humanitarian workers were desperately worried about Yemen before a single bomb was dropped, and now thousands and thousands and thousands of bombs have been dropped, effectively destroying Yemen. They've destroyed most of the health system. They destroyed schools. Human Rights Watch did an excellent report pointing out that they've consistently attacked economic targets. I mean, nothing to do with any kind of war effort, but like, you know, potato chip factories, water bottling factories, power plants. It's an effort to destroy Yemen. And that's what, as Christine said, and we are part of that. This is our war, and it's shameful. I mean, I'll give you one quick example. Yes, everyone's horrified by Syria and what's going on there, and quite rightly so. And we've had this picture of that poor Syrian child that's gone viral. Yesterday, the New York Times had had a piece saying picture of one Syrian child went viral, but here are 7 others. So 7 other children that got similarly affected. And I thought, oh, maybe they'll mention a Yemeni. Not so. Syria and 7 other unfortunate Syrian children. But I defy you to find a single picture in the New York Times or any other mainstream New York media of any of the hundreds, if not thousands, of Yemeni children, because no one really knows how many have been wounded or killed by the Saudi bombing.
Last August, Red Cross President Peter Maurer went to Yemen. He said Yemen, after 5 months, looks like Syria after 8 years. No, he said Yemen after 5 months looks like Syria after 5 years.
Yes, isn't that a shocking? I mean, that we've heard so much about Syria, and yet, you know, the Saudis have been on fast forward, and us. I have to keep reminding us of that. Our war in Yemen has been on fast forward, and we've, you know, just done devastating damage to the country. And I quote in my piece, you know, I asked a senior State Department official, what was the Saudi plan when they started this bombing campaign? What was the strategy for the bombing? And he got completely exasperated. He said, plan? There was no plan. They simply bombed anything and everything, anything that might be a military target. You know, trucks on the highway, that became a military convoy. And when they did find a military target, they kept and bombed it and bombed it and bombed it again. So it seems indiscriminate, although interestingly, I mean, we've had these recent atrocities of the Médecins Sans Frontières hospital, the 4th one they hit last week, plus the schools. But there was an important bridge, which is a sort of route to carrying food supplies and essential supplies up from the port, up from Hodeidah. They hit that as a way, effective means of increasing the hunger level and the general distress level in Sana'a. So this is a very, very, very cruel war that we are helping to wage.
U.S. Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy has spoken out against U.S. support for the Saudi-led bombing campaign in Yemen. He was speaking to CNN's Jake Tapper last week.
There's an American imprint on every civilian life lost in Yemen. Why? Well, it's because though the Saudis are actually dropping the bombs from their planes, they couldn't do it without the United States. It's our munitions sold to the Saudis. It's our planes that are refueling the Saudi jets. And it's our intelligence that are helping the Saudis provide their targeting. We have made a decision to go to war in Yemen against a Houthi rebel army that poses no existential threat to the United States. It's really wild to me that we're not talking more about this in the United States. The United States Congress has not debated a war authorization giving the president the power to conduct this operation in Yemen.
Senator Murphy went on to say that Congress can put an end to arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Now, what about this, Andrew Cockburn? Is this about Yemen, or is this simply about President Obama supporting the U.S. arms industry?
Well, it's very little to do with Yemen because it's clear we don't care about Yemen. I mean, there's little groups in the State Department and elsewhere who do maybe, but no, we don't care much about Yemen, and we don't care if we destroy it. What we do care about is the health and well-being of the U.S. arms industry. I mean, I'll give you a good little example. In 2010, or the end of the U.S. announced, or it was announced, that the largest arms sale in U.S. history, which was a $60 billion sale of warplanes, of F-15 jets, plus bombs and missiles and missile guidance, bomb guidance systems, and all the rest that they've been using ever since. That was, if you look in the Hillary Clinton's released emails, you'll find a sort of round of celebration, good news, a Christmas present. This was all part of the strategy which the Obama administration's been pursuing since the beginning of increasing arms sales abroad. And you remember, it's not just the actual sort of things that we think of weapons. I mean, the bomber plane, the F-15 planes, the missiles, the bombs. It's also the whole infrastructure that keeps them going. I mean, I looked into this, the huge contracts that are in place to service, to keep the whole machine running. Senator Murphy, in his excellent statement, he could have mentioned one other thing, which is the fact that these planes are largely maintained. I mean, what keeps them in the air are the teams of American contract workers who are on the grounds. If you look on job search sites, you'll find job opportunities in Saudi Arabia to service F-15, maintain F-15 planes, and everything else that's required to keep this war going. So in so many ways, we are part of this, and very profitably so. I mean, not just the $110 billion you mentioned. I believe, I could be wrong, but it's roughly, we have 7,000 people on the production line at the Boeing plant in St. Louis working on this huge Saudi F-15 order. And I've seen a figure that across the country, in terms of subcontractors doing the bits that go in to make these planes, perhaps as many as another 30 or 35,000 workers around the country. This is a huge number of jobs and a huge amount of money. So in a way, given the sort of value system that we have here today, it's really no surprise that we're doing this.
In June, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon removed the U.S. Saudi-backed, Saudi-led coalition fighting Houthi rebels in Yemen from a blacklist of forces responsible for killing children. Ban Ki-moon later acknowledged he was coerced into removing Saudi Arabia from the blacklist of forces responsible for killing children after the kingdom threatened to cut off funding to the UN. This is what he said.
The report describes horrors no child should have to face. At the same time, I also had to consider the very real prospect that millions of other children would suffer grievously if, as was suggested to me, countries would defund many UN programs. Children already at risk in Palestine, South Sudan, Syria, Yemen, and so many other places would fall further into despair. It is unacceptable for member states to exert undue pressure.
It's UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Andrew Cockburn.
Well, isn't this shocking? I mean, that this that our supreme international body has to, as it admits, cravenly crumble before this bandit regime threatening, saying, well, if you criticize us for going around killing children, we're going to starve a few more. I mean, that is just disgraceful on the strength of it, quite apart from everything else we've been talking about the weapons. I think they should have been, well, I mean, it's an absurd joke that they should be on the Human Rights Council for a start. I mean, it's really a sick joke that these people should be allowed to say anything about human rights, for all the reasons people know very well, not just what's going on in Yemen, but everything that goes on in Saudi Arabia, for that matter.
Why is the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia sacrosanct, it seems? And what do you think of the media coverage of Saudi Arabia?
Well, the relationship goes back. I mean, we go back to when Saudi Arabia, the Americans sort of forged the alliance, the relationship in 1945, when Roosevelt met with the King of Saudi Arabia, and they really came to a deal. The U.S. would support the regime and keep this, this family who named the country after themselves, the House of Saud, keep them in power. That was the deal. In exchange for a guarantee of cheap oil supplies to this country. I mean, not many people know that actually up until 2002, they actually did subsidize the price of oil, Saudi oil that came to this country. There's other things that go along with it, like overflights. It would be very inconvenient for us to run those huge bases we have in the Gulf in Doha and Bahrain if we weren't allowed to fly over Saudi Arabia, which they make it clear that's a conditional right. And once in a while, I was told by a former ambassador, they refuse permission. So there's things like that. But I think first and foremost, it's all about money. This $110 billion we've been talking about repeatedly, which was only that's only under Obama, let alone what's gone on in previous years. But the huge amount of money that washes into Washington. There's been revelations in recent days, the amount the Saudis gave the Clinton campaign, the number of lobbyists in Washington that are on the Saudi payroll. It's a very, it's really a relationship sort of lined with gold. That's sort of become a matter of habit. I talk in the article about, for example, just outside Riyadh, there's quite a big housing compound with several thousand Americans, whose job is there's the U.S. military training mission to the Saudi armed forces, and that's been there permanently since the early 50s. In fact, it was agreed on at that historic meeting in 1945. It's always run by a two-star Air Force or Army general. The Saudis pay $30 million a year to have this training mission, which is also, as it says in its mission statement on its its job is to sell U.S. weapons to Saudi Arabia. So it's a relationship, I think, fundamentally built on arms sales.
I wanted to read you an article, an excerpt from David Sirota, headlined "Clinton Foundation Donors Got Weapons Deals from Hillary Clinton's State Department." Sirota wrote, quote, "In the years before Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia contributed at least $10 million to the Clinton Foundation, the philanthropic enterprise she's overseen with her husband, former President Bill Clinton. Just 2 months before the deal was finalized, Boeing, the defense contractor that manufactures one of the fighter jets the Saudis were especially keen to acquire, the F-15, contributed $900,000 to the Clinton Foundation. This, according to a company press release." Those are the words of David Sirota. Andrew Cockburn.
Well, I mean, commentary is almost superfluous, and there you have it. The Saudis put $10 million into the Clinton Foundation. The Boeing Corporation puts $900,000. In fact, in those Clinton emails I referred to earlier, they're saying when they're all Clinton and her staff are celebrating that giant weapons sale, F-15 and weapons sale in 2010, they're saying, get onto the Boeing Corporation and tell them the good news. I mean, it's someone once said that the business of the U.S. government is to acquire arms at home and sell arms abroad, and I think this is a very good example of that.
Finally, what do you think needs to happen?
Well, for a start, we should sort of resign from this war. I mean, as Christine said, we are part of this war, so we should quit. We should not be supplying any more weapons. We should not be supplying intelligence. We should try, I mean, might be contractually difficult, but we should suddenly cut off the flow of American contract workers, who are servicing these planes. We should make it clear that we're not part of this. We should also, I think, that the Saudis, of course, will be hysterical about it, but we should make it clear that we are doing that, and would try and work for for some kind of peaceful solution before there's anything left of Yemen, which is not much as far as I can see at the moment. But something, that the Saudi-backed side has to stop demanding the unconditional surrender of the Houthis. On the other hand, the Houthis and their ally, former President Saleh, who I must say is certainly no angel himself, have to be given some inducement, perhaps by us working with the Iranians or in some way persuading them that they have to settle for less than maximum success. But we have to stop. We have to quit this war. I mean, it's unconscionable what's going on.
Andrew Cockburn, I want to thank you for being with us, Washington editor for Harper's Magazine. We'll link to your latest piece, Acceptable Losses, Aiding and Abetting the Saudi Slaughter in Yemen.